Hello again. And we shy away from all things COVID-19 related for a moment, and we focus on women who've been left out of history's Hall of Fame, despite their tremendous contribution to some of the events that have helped shape our lives. We've decided to celebrate one of these icons who've contributed to South Africa and the world at large. Charlotte Maxeke. To discuss this now, I'm joined via Skype by lecturer at the University of Pretoria, Atambile Masola. Ngosi Sisi, perhaps let's start with why it was so important for you to look at these many women who contributed to the liberation of the continent.
Hi, Dudu. Thanks for having me. I think it's important because it helps us locate the current struggles that women are still fighting in terms of women's liberation. So people like Nodizim Koeto, Charlotte Maxeke, and her contemporaries, Mina Soga, have been at it for a long time. So for me, it's always important to know whose shoulders we stand on in order for us to understand our present. And often the people who get forgotten are the people who come pre-1956, because we think that the women's movement begins with the Women's March on the 9th of August. But what we actually see, even with that moment, is that women such as Charlotte Maxeke had been working so hard even before that moment.
Let's talk more about Mama Maxeke. Who exactly is she?
So Mama Maxeke was born in the Uitenhage area, what we call the Uitenhage area now, and grew up in Kimberley, but was really famous for having been one of the women who traveled as part of the African Jubilee Choir to both the UK and the US, and ended up studying at Wilberforce University in the US in the late 1800s and graduated in the early 1900s. And she came back and became very instrumental in establishing the AME Church, as well as the Bantu Women's League, as well as many other women's organizations in the early 1900s. And she was really important in just kind of establishing what does women's work look like, especially in the urban space, because with the kind of woman coming into the city space in the Johannesburg area, she was also a juvenile delinquent officer, so helping young women who were in prisons in the cities. So she, for me, is quite a pioneer in the sense that she was really, it was important in terms of building organizations. The Bantu Women's League is like the precursor to many organizations that follow after that.
What was her political philosophy?
Well, I mean, more broadly, I think she was very much pro-woman. She was very much pro-education. She was very much pro-collaboration. So Zubaida Jaffa in her biography writes about how she collaborated with women across class, across race, in order for the work to be done. So for her political philosophy, I think, was about, there's a quote about, if you want to move ahead, you've got to take people with you. And so it was, I mean, in a broader sense, I guess it would be about Ubuntu, it would be about women's rights, very specifically. And so it was about changing, and kind of at the cornerstone of that would have been the influence of her education at Wilberforce, where she was in an institution that was created for free enslaved people, and then kind of coming into what does freedom look like. And so she kind of takes that philosophy from that education, having been taught by people like W.E.B. Du Bois, and brings it into South Africa to kind of say, what does it look like for Black South Africans to be free, particularly women?
You have a number of phenomenal women across the continent. Mamia Asantewa, you have the Dahomey warriors, and then you spoke a little bit about Umam Kweta. You mentioned her name. Tell us about her and her contribution.
So Nontsisi Mgoti is very interesting in that there's very little that we know about her other than what she says about herself in her poetry. But we know that she was a contemporary of Mam Charlotte Maxeke, and she was a poet in the 1920s. And her poetry was about very kind of politically incisive. There's a beautiful poem that she writes called Uqhekeko le Congress, which is the split of Congress. So we have this idea that 1912, the Congress comes together and there's this cohesive organization. But we see in that poem that she was speaking directly to the politics of her time, and kind of lambasting the leadership at the time, people like Omar Khato and John Dube. And then she also writes a wonderful poem called Maibuye Africa, kind of talking about this idea, the rallying cry of come back Africa, let Africa be restored to itself. So she was, in a sense, you could say, quite a Black consciousness and an Africanist poet who was really thinking about what does it mean for Black people to use their voice. And she wrote in poetry, which was very unusual at the time. And so I see the two of them, Mam Charlotte and Mam Nontsizi Mqwetho, in conversation with each other. In fact, there's evidence historically of that they referenced each other's significance in their own writing in Umthetheli Wabantu, which was a newspaper in the 1920s.
Keen to find out what this has meant for you as you were digging through history and just finding stories of these phenomenal women.
So for me, I think it was one that just this idea of erasure is something that we have to guard against. So it cannot be that, we're constantly referencing women in the past 100 years or even in the past 50 years, is that we have to dig deep. And that how do we understand history if there are people who are left out? So that was the first thing. And the second thing for me was that many of the things that women are saying right now, so we remember that one year when the ANC Women's League said South Africa, or the Women's League isn't ready for a woman president. That for me was just, do you even know what your women's movement has been able to achieve in order for you to be able to then say something like that? So it always puts into conversation the things that we have currently in conversations with the past. And for me, it just makes me feel so much more better about being a woman who values the voice, my own voice and the voice of other women, that it actually has a long tradition, 100-year tradition, a 200-year tradition, a 700-year tradition of all these women who we can now find evidence of, who have always spoken out, who have always rallied together, have always mobilized for women's rights and for the upliftment of more than just themselves.
For somebody who would like to read up on this, to familiarize themselves with the work that you do, where can they find it?
So we have a website called Asinakuthula, which is part of the organization that I'm part of, Asinakuthula Collective. You can find us on Instagram and on Twitter, Asinakuthula. And on Wednesdays and Fridays, we do sort of Woman Crush Wednesday about contemporary women who are doing wonderful things. And then on Fridays, we do Flashback Fridays, and we do profiles of all these women from across the continent who are doing all this work. So it's Asinakuthula on Instagram and Twitter, and asinakuthula.org.za is our website, where we also share some of our resources. And hopefully we'll be having a Maxeke Mqwetho annual lecture later in the year. It was supposed to be yesterday, but in light of COVID, we had to cancel that. So later in the year, we'll definitely be doing a more public event, probably live stream. We will have Makhosazana Xaba talking about her reflections on these legacies.
Since you do mention, rightfully so, that it is Women Crush Wednesday, you are a woman crush for the work that you do. Absolutely. Thank you very much.